Hey, this is Sam Sanden, and you are listening to Salt and Light. My passion is for you to live out your faith in everyday life, fully alive, and in turn to see the culture around you transform. With a unique perspective as a Swedish immigrant, pastor, small business owner, and politically engaged citizen, my prayer is that this podcast will encourage, inspire, equip, challenge, and mobilize you to become the salt and light God created you to be at this exact moment in history. What a time to be alive, friends. Let's go.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here at Salt and Light. My name is Sam, and it's my pleasure to host you this day. And today I'm super excited. We have a great friend, a dear guest with us, Bill Federer. He's been at our church, and I've seen him numerous times, and he's a prolific writer. He's got a website called American Minute, where he gives just snippets of American history and how faith has been involved from the very beginning of our founding and even way before that. And it's been a great inspiration to myself and my wife and to my two boys. And I'm really thrilled to have him with me today. He's got a brand new book out called Silence is Consent. And looking at salt and light, I think that's something that is vital to understand, that salt that is not salty and light that is not shining is useless. And I think we've for so long wanting to fit in the culture we're in, and we've kind of got lulled in that belief that our faith should be private and not lived out in the public space. And I think that's totally false. So, Bill, thank you so much for being with me today, and I would love for you to just go for it. If maybe talk about how we can engage in culture and how we came to the point where we thought it's more holy to be quiet than to speak the truth.
Right. Well, Sam, you and Sharnessa and your family are so special to me, and just appreciate the great job you're doing for the Lord. And but yeah, the wedding ceremonies that there's traditional is the pastor will say, if anyone present knows of any reason why this couple shall not be joined together in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. And so if you're holding your peace, you're actually giving consent, right? Your silence is giving consent to the wedding vows. It is a drawn from Numbers chapter 30. And it's a short chapter, 6 scenarios of silence equals consent. One is if a daughter is still living in her father's house in her youth and binds herself with a vow, in the day the father hears about it, if he's silent, her vows stand. But if he disallows it, she's released from the vow. And so the pastor says, okay, church members, if you're silent when you hear these vows, you're giving your consent. And so it's called the rule of tacit admission, TACIT, tacit. And it's in real estate law. You save up money, you buy a rent house, and somebody moves in it, a squatter, and they're not paying rent, and you're not trying to evict them. They can actually gain title to your property through adverse possession just by you being silent. It's in trademark law. You design a trademark and somebody flat out copies it. And if you know about it and you're not trying to defend your copyright, they get to use it. It's in debt collection law. Somebody owes you money. You wait 10 years to try to start collecting. The judge will say you're past the statute of limitations. Sorry, you've been silent too long. You don't get any money. And so it's in our U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 7. It says Congress passes a bill and puts it on the president's desk. If any bill shall not be returned by the president within 10 days, the same becomes a law in like manner as if he had signed it. All he has to do is be silent for 10 days and it equals his signature. And so if a church member's silence gives consent to wedding vows, the church member's silence gives consent to other things. And if they're killing babies in the community and the church members are silent, they're giving their consent to killing babies. If they're mutilating children and teaching the trans agenda and the church members know that Jesus taught in Matthew 19, in the beginning, God made them male and female, and the church members are silent, their silence, they're giving consent to the teaching of something other than what Jesus would teach. I mean, would Jesus teach the trans agenda? No. Matthew 19, Jesus said in the beginning, God made a male and female. Think of the irony. Here are teachers who cannot even define what a woman is. And they think they can tell that a little boy is supposed to be a little girl. It's like, you can't even define little girl. How do you know he's supposed to be one? right? It's illogical. And Jesus said, if you allow one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, it is better that a millstone be put around your neck and you be thrown in the depths of the sea. So all the church members think, oh, we're silent. We don't get involved in politics. We're just so holy. It's like, yeah, but you're silent toward all the evils that are going. You're giving your consent to them. And you are an accessory to the crime you'll share in the judgment. There's a chapter in the Bible, Leviticus 20, and Moses and Aaron are called to the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord speaks and says, Moses, take the rod, thou and Aaron. Speak to the rock and water will come out. Well, they gather the assembly, and Moses lifts up his rod and hits the rock once, and then lifts up his rod, hits the rock twice. Water comes out abundantly. End of the chapter. It says, Aaron will not enter the land because both of you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. It's like, both? We just read the chapter. Aaron didn't do anything. He didn't say anything the entire chapter. It's like, yeah, that's just it. He was at the door of the tabernacle. He heard God say, speak to the rock. When Moses lifted up the rod the first time and hit the rock, it probably took Aaron by surprise. When Moses lifted up the rod the second time, Aaron knew what was coming, and he did not protest. He didn't say, well, Moses, hold it. No, he was silent. And in that instant, Aaron was guilty. Moses's was a sin of commission. Aaron's was a sin of omission. Leviticus 5 says a person sins because he did not speak up, even though he was an eyewitness to a case or knew what happened. Anyone who failed to testify is guilty. Acts 22, the Apostle Paul talking to the Lord and says, and when they shed the blood of thy martyr Stephen, I stood by silent, consenting to his death. Paul did not say a word. Paul did not throw a stone. Yet Paul knew he was guilty for the death of Stephen just by standing there silent. Proverbs 24, it says, rescue those who are unjustly sentenced to death. Don't stand back and let them die. Don't try to disclaim responsibility by saying you didn't know about it. For God, who knows all hearts, knows yours, and he knows that you knew, and he will hold you accountable. The verse everyone knows is Leviticus 19:18. Love your neighbor as yourself. You know the verse right before it? Confront your neighbor directly so you will not be held guilty for their sin. Another translation says, rebuke your neighbor directly so you'll not incur their guilt upon you. So here they are loving each other, and they're correcting and confronting and rebuking each other. Right? It's a self-policing system. They had no king that first 400 years. They had no police that first 100 years. If you heard somebody take God's name in vain, you had to go and tell the elders of the city, right? I mean, it was everybody was taught the law. Everybody helped enforce the law. They were loving each other and they were correcting and rebuking each other. And, I saw this one video and they said, well, if your child wants to go through transition, just love them, just accept them. You love your child and you correct your child. If you were to leave your child up to doing whatever they felt like, they would eat candy all day long and their teeth would rot out their head, right? You're the adult, right? And so the idea is that there's the two types of sins. There's sins of commission and there's sins of omission by being silent. Mordecai tells Esther, there's a mandate from the government to kill the Jews. If you remain silent at this time, you and your family will be killed and God will raise up somebody else to deliver Israel. And so this is important for us to understand because for all the church members that think, oh, we're really spiritual, we don't get involved in politics. Our church, we're a little more spiritual than your church because we've reached this high level of spirituality where we don't care what kind of country we're leaving our children. I mean, forget the verse, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. We don't care about our children. It's almost like Hezekiah is sick, recovers, ambassadors from Babylon come, and Hezekiah shows them all the treasures, sort of pridefully. And Isaiah said, what'd you show him? He goes, everything. He goes, well, someday all those treasures will be in Babylon, and your sons will be eunuchs in the palace of Babylon. And Hezekiah's response was, well, at least it's going to be okay during my lifetime. You feel like reaching through the pages of the Bible and slapping him. I mean, when David was told that his son with Bathsheba was going to die, David threw himself on his face and he fasted for a week, right? Our founders sacrificed their prosperity for their posterity. They pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor for a generation yet unborn. Yet today it's flipped, and people are sacrificing their posterity for prosperity, settling our kids with an unpayable debt. The government is adding $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. They are so irresponsible that other countries are beginning to ditch the dollar and trade in something called BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South Africa, or whatever the S is, and now Iran and Egypt, and all these countries say, well, the dollar is getting inflated so much, it's not holding its value. And we don't care that we're going to give our kids a country that's bankrupt, as long as it's okay during our lifetime. You know, some people say, I'm not going to get involved. I'm just going to wait for the rapture. And I have a question for them. Who do you think you're going to meet when you're raptured? Jesus. Does Jesus love the little children? Yeah. You think he might wonder why you didn't do anything to protect him? I mean, we're not in China or North Korea where you don't vote. We're in America where the citizen is the king. The politicians are your servants. They are supposed to do what you tell them to do. And even if we can't turn it around, shouldn't we at least try? Shouldn't we at least show the Lord what's in our heart by trying? And so, you know, I was thinking, we're the bride of Christ, and every romance novel builds up to a decision-making moment, right? You're watching this movie, and then, you know, and then finally there's this decision-making moment where there's a forsaking of all others and choosing the one. And I think, since we're the bride of Christ, right, I think God is intentionally pushing the world to a decision-making moment. And some people are going to choose the all others, right? They're going to want to be liked and friended and followed so much that they're going to cave, you know? And so I was thinking, you know, judging from what little I know of prophecies and looking at global world situations, you sort of get the feeling we're getting closer to the end. And it's almost like God's saying, okay, we're getting close to the end of this romance novel, and I need you to make your decision. I'm going to make it really easy for you. I'm going to pull back the curtain. And it's like in The Wizard of Oz, that scene where you got the great Oz, and then the dog Toto pulls back the curtain, you see his old man. And so God's like pulling back the curtain, and you're seeing flat out, there's Satan clubs on elementary school campuses, Satan worshiping Grammys, Satan trans clothes designers for Target, Satan statues in the Iowa State Capitol, you know, Disney FX having a little demon Satan cartoon. It's like, hello. I mean, you know, I'll be 67 coming up soon. Never in my life have I seen it so out in your face, Satan. And at the same time, people are being bolder for Jesus. And I think God is pushing the world, and some people are going to be doing the evil stuff, and some people are going to be silent in the face of the evil. It's not going to bother them. They'll want to be accepted and followed and friended and so forth. And there's others of us that are going to say, you know what? I tolerated something I didn't feel good about. And then I even stretched the rubber band and tolerated something else I didn't feel good about. But I'm sorry, I can't be silent when they want to do a hysterectomy on a little 8-year-old girl because she went through a tomboy phase. And I'm sorry, I can't go with castrating a little boy because he played with his sister's dolls. And they cut the rubber band and it snaps. There's this division that takes place. I think God's pushing the world to this decision moment. And some people are going to go with the all others, right? I mean, I don't mean to jump in right here, but this is the thought. People say, well, you know, in Germany, they were putting Jews on train cars and they were going past the church. They had this concept in Germany of the two kingdoms, kingdom of the government, kingdom of the church, the two don't touch. And these Jews are crying out for help. And the church's response was, well, that's the government doing that. And we're the church and we're holy, so we can't get involved in government stuff. And it reminds me of a few months ago, I was in Colorado and a state representative, Scott Bottoms, introduced a bill for minimum punishment for those caught buying and selling 1 to 5-year-old children for sex. As abhorrent as that is, he just wanted a minimum punishment. Every Democrat voted against it. And where's the church? Where's the church? Where we don't get involved. They're selling children. And then just a couple months ago in California, you had a state senator named Shannon Groves introduced a bill to make purchasing a child for sex a felony rather than just a misdemeanor where they get 2 days in jail. And every Democrat voted against making it a felony. And so a Democrat state senator named Susan Eggman gets on the floor. You can watch the video. And she says, I'm a social worker, and I've worked with women who have been abused as little children, and it scars them for life. And you're more concerned about this guy that's going to get out in 2 days and do it again? And she goes, I'm done. Right. And so here, where's the church? It's like, oh, they're selling children. Oh, we're so spiritual, we don't get involved in politics. It's like, they're killing Jews. Oh, we're so spiritual, we don't get involved in politics. And it's like, does Jesus love the little children? Oh, yeah. And does Jesus live inside of you? Yeah. Well, then should you care about the little children? And so the answer is local. I mean, and so there's more people that go to church in an area than vote in a school board race. And so if the churches can just say, look, we don't agree with every church on every doctrine, but none of us are happy with what's being taught in the school. Let's just get behind some mama bear and vote her in, and then show up early and fill up the school board meeting so they don't bus in people to beat up on her. And if churches can just care, and you don't have to have a child in the public school to be on the school board. You don't have to have children to be on the school. You can be a homeschooling parent and still be on the school board in the public school system. I know some people that do that. And if churches can just care about the children, not just the ones that go to their church, but the ones that live in the neighborhood around the church. I mean, does Jesus love those kids? Yeah. We used to send buses out and bus the kids in, right? Because we knew Jesus cares about all the children. But I mean, shouldn't we care about what they're being taught? And if they have a tactic, and that's to guilt trip Christians into being more Christian than Christ. You say that again? Yeah, they say if you're really Christian, you'll be silent while we teach your kids something Jesus would never teach, right? Would Jesus teach the trans agenda? And Jesus said, if you allow one of these little ones that believes me to stumble, better than a millstone be put around your neck and be thrown in the depths of the sea. So I think it's going to be a rude awakening for all those churches and church members who think they're being spiritual. Oh, we don't get involved in politics. We're a little more spiritual than you are. When they realize by their silence, they're giving consent to all that wicked stuff. They're inviting the judgment of God on their heads.
Wow. Yes, it's so true. And it drives me crazy. I remember reading in a John Stott book about how, we as a church, we're so good at bemoaning the state of the world. We're complaining and whining, and then he's using the analogy of a fish, right? A fish that's rotten a fish is gonna rot if it's not salted, right? And how the world is gonna be dark if we don't engage, because that's just what happens. A fish will rot. The world will go to hell in a handbag if we don't engage. And it's so important to do that. And I think I can't understand people that think, like you're saying, it's more holy to step aside, or that we don't want to dirty our hands, or we just don't want to offend anyone, and we're so worshiping being nice rather than worshiping Jesus. We're wanting to be known as being nice instead of sometimes be willing to flip some tables over. And of course, we're to speak the truth in love, but we have to engage. It's not an option. The world will get darker and darker and darker if we stay out. And in fact, as you well know, the way our government is because Christians have stepped out and thought it's more holy to separate. I love the story. I've heard you tell it about the Muhlenbergers and how they engaged. And this whole false understanding, as well as the church has come to believe the separation of church and state. So would you tell the story of the Muhlenbergers and kind of show what our founding fathers, how they approach this?
Yeah. So the most common form of government in world history is gangs, and a gang leader with enough weapons we call a king. And from Nimrod on, you have kings that want people to fear them more than fear God. And anyway, so these kingdoms keep getting bigger and bigger until the King of England had the biggest. The sun never set on the British Empire. He was a globalist. He was a one world government guy. And then you have the Reformation, and you have the development of a congregational church government, church structure, where the pastor trains the saints to do the work of the ministry, versus the hierarchical church structure, where it's a clergy laity model, where you watch the clergy do the ministry and the laity is lazy and watches. It's a spectator religion, right? Versus the pastor as a coach, and and so these ideas go back to the Bible, where the Calvinists, Puritans, and Baptist, Presbyterians, and Quakers, they draw their ideas of a congregational church structure from the first 400 years out of Egypt before King Saul. So 1400 BC, Israelites come out of Egypt, millions of them, and for 400 years, there's no king. The system works because every citizen is taught the law and personally accountable to God to follow it. And it works until the priests stop teaching the law. You say they did? Yeah, here's Eli, the high priest. His own sons are sleeping with women in the tent where the Ark of the Covenant is. This is the high priest's own son sleeping with women. And then you have another Levite with a silver graven image in the house of a guy named Micah. And you're like, what's this Levite doing with the graven image? And then one of the commandments, you're not supposed to have them. And then another Levite with a concubine who gets raped to death by a bunch of sodomites. And by the time you're grossed out, you read this line, every man did that which was right in their own eyes. Why? Because the priest stopped teaching them what was right in the Lord's eyes. And it turns into chaos. They all go to Samuel, the prophet, and they say, we want to be like the other countries. We want a king. And they get King Saul. Now, why is this story important? Because the kings of Europe looked to the Bible for their authority, but they looked to the King Saul and on part of the Bible. The divine right of kings, God chose me. The Calvinist, Puritans, Baptists, Presbyterians, Quakers that founded New England, they looked to the pre-King Saul part of the Bible. Right? Millions of people, everybody taught the law, personally accountable to God to follow it. That's why they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard. So King Saul is the divider between England and America. Now, why is this important? Romans 13 is understood differently in a monarchy versus a republic. In a monarchy, subjects submit to the king. In a republic, the citizens are the king. The politicians are your servants. You hire them, you fire them, you vote them in, you vote them out. They're supposed to do what you tell them to do, right? It would be silly for a king to have to obey his janitor, right? The politicians are your servants. They're supposed to do what you tell them to do, right? It's not. And so the pastors that say, well, you just got to submit to the government. It's like they need to pick up and go to China or North Korea. And when Nebuchadnezzar blows the trumpet, they need to bow, surrender your conscience to the government. But the founders of America look to the pre-King Saul part of the Bible, right? Where each person's taught the law. Each person's accountable to God to follow the law. And so this is, so the 1600s, you have this Calvinist Puritan concept of a covenant form of government. And guess what? The word federal is Latin for covenant. We have a covenant form of government where we, the people, rule ourselves bottom up. And after a century, this wonderful plan got a little dry. It became academic. It was just a plan. And some of them took it the next step and said, God has a plan for your life, your marriage, your family, your church, your government. And then God, in his infinite wisdom, already knows who's going to wind up in heaven. So don't even bother preaching the gospel. Whoever's supposed to get saved, they'll get saved, right? And they became unevangelistic. And so David Brainerd got expelled from Yale because he said his professor was as spiritual as a chair. And the Yale students got reprimanded because the students went into the town of New Haven and they smashed windows. No, they were caught preaching the gospel to strangers on the street. And they weren't licensed to preach yet. And they weren't wearing a black robe in church, and it was considered disrespectful, right? And so in the 1700s, you have the New Lights. Puritans are now nicknamed Old Lights. And the New Lights said, look, it is more than a plan. You have to have a personal experience with Jesus. And when you do, your life will change. And you won't do worldly things anymore, like go to bars and brothels and get involved in government. It's like, what was that last thing? Yeah, government, it's worldly. If you're really a Christian, you're not going to be involved in it. Now, this is different than the Puritans. The Puritan says, hey, everybody, we can rule ourselves without a king. We all need to get involved, right? We're involved in church stuff. We're involved in civil stuff. But these pietists are like, no, don't get involved. It's worldly. You could get dirty. And so I trace in that book, Silence Equals Consent, where the pietists came from. And so 1517, Martin Luther starts the Reformation because he had a personal experience. The just shall live by faith. Very personal. So much so, he was willing to stand up to the most powerful government leader in the world, the King of Spain, Charles V, and say, unless you can prove me wrong from Scripture, here I stand, so help me God. Very personal. But some German princes want to break from Rome. And they say, this is my chance I've been waiting for. Kingdom of mine, I just made the decision. You are all now Lutherans. And the people in their kingdom are like, okay, what do we believe? So for the people in the kingdom, it's not the same personal experience necessarily that Martin Luther had. It's just a new state doctrine. So this revival movement starts called pietism that said being a Christian is more than doctrine, even if it's good doctrine. You have to have an experience with Jesus, and when you do, your life will change. You won't do worldly things like bars and brothels and government. It turned into the German concept of the two kingdoms, the kingdom of the government, the kingdom of the church, the two don't touch. And you even had German princes donating money to the pietists so they would teach their people not to get involved in the prince's business. That's like George Soros and the Rockefellers giving money to woke seminaries so they would teach Christians not to get involved, while at the same time they're giving money to their LGBTQ activists to get them involved. And so in the contrast, the Puritan says everybody get involved in church and in government. You can do two things. You can be a king and a priest, right? You can be a spouse and you can be a parent. Two completely different roles, but one person can do both. You can be involved in church stuff. You can be involved in civil stuff. One person can do both, not the pietists. They said government is worldly. If you're really spiritual, you will withdraw from the worldly government and just do church stuff. Well, there's a question for you. If all the spiritual people stop getting involved in government, who's left to be involved but the less spiritual? And because they're less spiritual, they're going to yield to their ambitions and get power hungry and turn into tyrants. And 4 centuries of that two kingdom teaching in Germany allowed Hitler to put Jews on train cars. They're going right past the church, crying out for help. And the church's response was, well, that's the government doing that. And we're the church and we can't get involved in government stuff because we're holy. So let's just sing praise songs to Jesus louder. It's like, can anybody see there's something wrong with that picture? So the founder of the Lutheran Pietist Church in America is Henry Muhlenberg. He's not involved in politics. He has 2 sons, John Peter Muhlenberg, Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. They're not involved. The revolution starts. John Peter hears Patrick Henry's "Give me liberty, give me death" speech. He goes to George Washington, says, I want to help. Washington says, I'm going to make you a colonel. Go get your men. And he goes to church, preaches out of Ecclesiastes. There's a time for all things, time to gather stones, time to scatter stones, time to embrace, time to refrain from embracing, time to preach, time to fight. Takes off his black clerical robe. Underneath is a uniform of a continental officer. He has an altar call. 300 men of his church join the 8th Virginia Regiment, and John Peter gets promoted to general, and then he's elected to Congress after the war. Well, his brother, Frederick, is writing letters to John Peter saying, you are getting involved in things which, as a preacher, you have nothing whatsoever to do. And then John Peter writes back, or Frederick writes back and says, well, I cannot serve 2 masters, right? I can't be involved in church stuff and in state stuff. Well, then the British invade New York and burn Frederick's church. And then he decides to get involved. He's then elected to Congress, and he's elected the first Speaker of the House. The first Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives is Lutheran pastor, pietist turned getting involved, Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. And what did he pass along with his brother John Peter, who was in that first session of Congress? They passed the First Amendment. Does anybody think that these 2 pastors would vote to outlaw themselves? Pastors aren't supposed to be involved in politics, even though we both are pastors and we both are involved. No, the First Amendment, as well as the first 10 amendments, were simply handcuffs on the federal government to keep it from becoming a Frankenstein like King George III, ruling through mandate.
Exactly. It's wild.
Yeah. So.
Wow. Yeah. That's what I love learning this history. You know, I'm from Sweden originally, and a lot of this is new, but I think we've lost this history of understanding this connection. And we've kind of started to believe that, our founding fathers were deists. They believed in a God, but that he wasn't really involved and engaged. But the truth is, it couldn't be further from the truth. They knew that, and love us how Os Guinness put it, that you need to have freedom, but to have freedom you need to have morality, and to have morality you have to have faith, and you have to have all those things together, because only a moral people can truly govern themselves. And I love how the founding fathers looked to that pre-Saul era, and how when we know the truth in heart, when we have that external accountability, that we know that we will give account to the Lord one day and how we lived our lives, it changes everything. And then it's not that outside motivation, it's that internal motivation that we want to live and honor God in the way we live our lives. And I think it's so important. And, in your own life, I know you ran for Congress, 20 odd years ago. And I loved how you've stepped up to the plate and said, if no one else is doing it, I'm doing it. Do you just want to share a little bit how you ended up running for Congress and putting your hat in the ring back then?
Yeah, so I wrote my first book. It came off the press in 1994. It's called America's God and Country Encyclopedia of Quotations. And it sold 500,000 copies. Focus on the Family sold hundreds of thousands of copies of it. And we moved from Texas back to St. Louis, had some friends suggest we run for Congress. And we happened to be in Dick Gebhardt's district. And so he was the number one Democrat. He was the House Minority Leader. He was the Nancy Pelosi before Nancy Pelosi. And so it was the most expensive congressional race in Missouri history. We had the president's uncle, Bucky Bush, co-chair of my finance committee. We had Ted Nugent during commercials, Chuck Norris, Pat Boone, Art Linkletter, Zig Ziegler, Alan Keyes, Judge Roy Moore, Phyllis Schlafly. I spoke 3 times in the U.S. Capitol to the House Conference Committee, which is all the Republicans before they go out on the floor. We had the top 3 members of the U.S. Congress come into my district and campaign for me against the top Democrat. So it was the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, and then Dick Armey and J.C. Watts. I think that's historic. All right, to have the top 3 Republicans go to the top Democrat's district and campaign against him in his own backyard. Anyway, we were polled as ahead of time as winning. But then on election day, we get phone calls. My name was accidentally left off the ballot in 5 wards in the city of St. Louis. And then we're ahead, and electricity goes off at the Board of Election. And when they reboot, we go from ahead to behind. And then we're at our watch party, and watching TV, and the phone rings. It's our volunteer down at the Jefferson County Board of Election. And she says, they can't find the box of ballots from Guffey Elementary School. I'm like, that's the biggest precinct in Jefferson County that I personally stood in front of for 8 hours today. And you're telling me they lost the box of ballots? And I mean, it was one thing after another. And then my opponent announces he wins. And it's like, wait a second, and then we ran again. And the next time, they had a guy named Robert D. Odom who claimed he went in to vote and his name was not on the registered voter list. And rather than fill out a provisional ballot, he goes down to the federal courthouse, files a lawsuit to keep the polls open till midnight. And we drive downtown, and there's people lined up around the block downtown. It's like mayhem. And then the next day they find out that Robert D. Odom had died 2 years earlier. It's like, well, who brought the lawsuit then? Well, somebody in the Democrat Party. And it goes from front page to back page, and then it's forgotten. And it's like, what? And they can just do this type of stuff? We had a friend that tracked down. So I was running for Congress, and so obviously you have a lot of people voting for you. And one gentleman, his business was to get liquor licenses for restaurants. And he would go down to the city and get the registered voter list and send out mailers to everybody in an area around the restaurant so that they would have a chance of, opposing the liquor license if they wanted to. And he would go through and he says, they have 30 people living at one address. And he goes to the address. It was torn down and they built a city parking garage. And so there's like 30 people that use the city parking garage as their, and this is the city voting rolls. And it's like, there's people that are registered living in a field. You drive by the field, there's no buildings there, but yet this is their address. And so when this happens to you personally, right? When you spend 2 years of your life going to every possible political meeting, giving speeches, calling people, which is awkward, asking for money. I mean, and you neglect your family. And then on election night, they have these shenanigans take place. I had people that I hadn't heard from in 20 years. And when they saw, oh, Georgia, they had a water main break. They had to get all the Republicans out of the building. And then there's these video cameras of them pulling suitcases of ballots out from under the table and running them over through again. And then the Republican head of the state says, oh, there wasn't any voter. It's like, I had friends calling me I hadn't heard from in 20 years saying, this sounds exactly what they did to you 20 years ago. My wife said I was the crash dummy for their tactics against Trump. They tried it all out on me, and but I do think that we do our part. We trust God for the rest. And when Patrick Henry gave his "Give me liberty, give me death" speech, there's a line in there that says, "Oh, but God would raise up powerful friends to fight our battles for us." Well, that happened. France gets in the war, and when France gets in the war, Britain had to take its military, and instead of putting down a rebellion in the colonies, it had to stretch its military around the world to defend against the French around the world. It took the heat off, right? It helped us who would have thought that, Julian Assange would start WikiLeaks and dump all this stuff on Hillary out to the public, and which pulled the rug out of her camp. Who would have thought that Elon Musk would spend $40 billion and buy Twitter and break the January 6th narrative? Oh, there were these violent people that heard his speech, and they see all these peaceful people walking through, taking pictures, and then, and so we do our part, and then we trust God for the big part, but we still have to do our part. That's why I come back to local. As more power concentrates into fewer hands globally, God's counterbalance is to get more people involved locally. We all see more and more powers concentrated into the hands of fewer and fewer people. All these globalists and Klaus Schwab and George Soros, right? They're controlling more and more. Well, guess what? God's counterbalance is to get lots and lots and lots of people involved locally. And I tend to think that maybe God is allowing this scenario to push us to the place to have to make a decision to show what's in our heart. It says many were going to follow Jesus, but they didn't want to do so publicly because they didn't want to get put out of the synagogue because they love the praises of men more than the praises of God. I was thinking of even salvation is what? You confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. It's not just believing in your heart. You confess, right? You say something, and then there's a prescribed action, getting baptized after that. But it's this idea that, if you really believe it in your heart, it's going to come out of your mouth and in your actions. Imagine a guy watching football and you ask him, when was the last time you told your wife you love her? And he's like, I can't remember, but she knows my heart. It's like, okay, when was the last time you did anything to show your wife you love her? I can't remember, but she knows my heart. It's like, dude, we need to have a little marriage counseling here. People say, God knows my heart. Yes, he does. He knew Abraham's heart. He still wanted to see Abraham do something, be willing to take his son Isaac to the top of Mount Moriah. God knows my heart. Yeah. And he wants to hear some words out of your mouth, and he wants to have you do some actions. And so I think he's pushing. And if we're not going to play a good offense, let's at least play a good defense. If the church is not taking serious winning the world for Christ, at least let's not be silent when they want to mutilate the most innocent of all, little children.
Yeah, it really feels like we've hit this point where even the world is looking for someone to say that the emperor has no clothes. And I think that's one of the things that the whole, COVID brought out is that people had to take a stand. And I think the churches who took a stand and said, we believe in freedom. We believe that you know what's best for you. You make the choice. And we will be open because we need to stay connected. We cannot have church just watching a TV. It's like watching the fireplace on Netflix, right? It might look pretty, but it doesn't warm and it doesn't change. And it goes back to what you said what you said before too, about that we have to be around other believers. We have to speak the truth in love. We have to not only love one another in words, but also in doing, and calling things out when it's not working. And that only happens when we are in relationship with people, when we are engaging with people. And I think this is a golden opportunity for the church to stand for these truths and speak to those issues, because it is getting so insane, like you're saying, that the world is saying that this, I can't believe my eyes. Will someone tell me what is the truth? And churches who are standing on the truth and speaking truth on a Sunday morning, there's people just hungry for that. And we have this opportunity, instead of just being another place where, well, we don't want to offend anyone, we don't want to have any opinions, and all you end up with is this wishy-washy lukewarmness. And Jesus himself says, well, I'll spit that out of my mouth, right? And so we have this chance of speaking truth. And I love how Rob McCoy puts it, that when people say you can't legislate morality, well, the truth is someone's morality is being legislated. It happens all the time, and we have to then have a seat at the table. We have to be engaged. And when you have half of evangelical people are not even registered to vote, it's just insane. For me, becoming a citizen, which was actually 15 years ago yesterday. So I turned 15 yesterday as an American. But the two things that differed for me, that differed between having a green card and being a citizen was that now I could vote and I could be a part of a jury. Those are some responsibilities and duties that came with citizenship. And here you have a populace that don't even engage in any of those, that we don't even register to vote because we think we don't matter. And I think your story and how you ended it, talking about that we're called to be obedient and the result is up to God. That is so important to know, because it is easy to lose heart. It's easy to feel like, well, what does one vote matter? Why should he even? Oh, it's rigged. It's all this, that, and the other. And then if we step out, then it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. And we have to be a church that's salt and light, because if we're not salt, the world is going to get corrupted. If we're not light, the world will grow dark. And we cannot sit by anymore. We are to be accountable for the generation we're in. And to do that, we have to engage. I think we teach way too little on the sin of omission in the church. We all know about the sin of commission, like you mentioned earlier, but the omission, that when we disengage, when we don't do what we're supposed to do, and I think it's James that says it's just as bad when we know what to do and don't do it. It's just as bad as doing it.
Well, I did a 2-hour special with George Barna on the Christian Television Network, and he brought out some interesting statistics. And one was, in areas where they have the largest number of Christians, they have the lowest voter turnout. It's like, what? And it's this thought that, oh, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to get involved. Yeah, but your silence is giving consent to all that evil out there. I was thinking, Jesus didn't pet lambs all day long. His first sermon ended with them wanting to push him off a cliff. Another sermon ends with them picking up stones to stone him. Another sermon ends with people saying, this is a difficult saying, who can bear it? And they get up and walk out of church. Right? They walk with him no more. He didn't run after him and say, oh, you misunderstood me. No, he turns to the 12. You want to go too? There's a door. And Peter said, where else can I go? You're the only one with the words of eternal life. Jesus is invited to somebody's house for dinner. And the Pharisee noticed he did not wash his hands. And Jesus said, you Pharisees are more concerned about the outside of the cup and not the inside. You're like a sepulcher, pretty on the outside, inside full of dead men's bones. And the lawyer says, well, Jesus, by saying that, you're insulting us lawyers. He said, let me tell you about you lawyers. You heap burdens on people too heavy to carry. Don't even lift a finger. You hold the keys of knowledge. You don't go in and you don't let anybody else in. And he lays into them. And then the chapter ends. And you wonder if they ever got around to eating dinner. You sort of get the feeling he pushed them out. This is our loving Jesus. To the prideful, he was tough as nails. To the humble, he was as loving as can be. God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Right? There's this verse, fall on the stone and you're broken, or the stone falls on you and you're crushed. What does that mean? That means you voluntarily humble yourself, right? You fall on the stone, you humble yourself and confess, I was a sinner. God, I trust in Jesus to cleanse me of my sins, right? But if you're prideful, guess what? You're approaching the tough side of God. It's like magnets. One side they connect, and the other side they repel. And so I think Jesus, one time Jesus asked his disciples, Who do men say that I am? Some say thou art John the Baptist, some Elijah, some Jeremiah. And of course, Peter said, thou art the Christ. But if you think of it, who was John the Baptist? He stood up to the corrupt government leader, King Herod. Who was Elijah? He stood up to the corrupt government leaders, Ahab and Jezebel. Who was Jeremiah? He stood up to the corrupt kings, King Jehoiakim and King Zedekiah. And they're mistaking Jesus for this. You know, we're social creatures. We want to be accepted. We do not want to be rejected. I mean, it's just part of our makeup. And so here's Peter. He's around a fire, and a girl gets in his face and says, you were with Jesus. And you can just picture Peter. He's looking around the fire, and everybody's eyeing him. And he realizes he's about to get kicked out of this group. And he says, I never met the guy. It's like, that's it, Peter? You were with him 3 years, and you with him a couple hours ago, and you never met him? And it's like, it is a real fear to be kicked out of a group. Nobody likes that, right? We all want to be honored and and popular and everything. And so, but after the resurrection, Peter is filled with the Holy Spirit. And the Sanhedrin calls him in and says, we gave you strict orders not to speak in this name. And Peter said, it's better to obey God rather than men. It's like, whoa, what happened to Peter? Now he doesn't care about being kicked out of a group and kicked out of the synagogue. And it's like, before you didn't want, what happened to him? He got filled with the Holy Spirit. You know, Jesus had risen from the dead and was with them for 40 days, but they were still hiding out. It's only after they were filled with the Holy Spirit did they have the boldness to speak out against corruption, right? To speak the gospel. They even prayed when they were persecuted, Lord, grant us boldness, right? That we can preach your word. And so I think maybe that's one of the evidences of being filled with the Holy Spirit is you just got to speak out, right? You speak the gospel, but you also speak out against injustice. Rescue those who are unjustly sentenced to death. Defend the orphan and the widow, right? There's just something on the inside of you. You know, Ezekiel was given a vision by the Lord. And Ezekiel 9, and the Lord called them that had charge over the city to come near. Behold, 6 men came, every man with a destroying weapon in his hand. And he called to the one dressed in linen with the writer's inkhorn at his side. And he said, go through the midst of the city, put a mark on the foreheads of those who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. To the others, he said, go after them through the city, slay old and young, but do not come near anyone on whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. It's like, whoa, what's the difference between being slain or not? Does your heart sigh and cry over the abominations in the city? Right. Some people, it's like, okay, I'm fine with it. They're doing this to the kids. Okay, I'm fine with it. They're aborting them. They're mutilating them. Oh, I'm fine with that. I'm fine. I'm just going to be silent. I'm just going to be silent. And by your silence, you're giving consent to it. And there's others that are saying, I can't be silent anymore. I'm sorry, I was silent for a long time, but I just can't. They're innocent little children. There's nothing more innocent than children. And I just can't just sit back and let them be lied to and mutilated on. So anyway. So I think that this is an exciting time to be alive. It's an exciting time to be on the Lord's side. And one of the stories we love best in the Bible is when things look really hopeless. And God raises up an 80-year-old old man named Moses. And he stands up to the most powerful military government leader, the Pharaoh, and holds out his staff. And the waves come in and swallow up the Pharaoh. And David standing up to Goliath. You know, someday we'll be dead and we'll be in heaven and we'll be with all these great saints. And then we'll hear Esther saying, you know, if I die, I die. I'm going to go into the king and plead for the Israelites, you know, or Deborah or the Apostle Paul or Gideon. I mean, what are the stories we like? It looks hopeless, right? And then God raises up little bodies with faith and courage. But then when you're in heaven, everybody's going to look at you and say, tell us your story. What did you do when you were on earth, right? And it looked hopeless. What did you do? I'd hate for any of us to be up there and Jesus to walk in the room and have a screen come down and him show all this great stuff of miracles and people coming to the Lord and him saying, this is what I had planned for you to do on earth, but you just didn't have enough faith and courage. And you look back at your life and that mountain that held you back was a little anthill, fear of man. What are people going to say? Maybe they might post something bad about me on the internet. Maybe they'll cancel me. Maybe I won't get followed anymore. And then you say, I let that little fear of man that anthill hold me back from doing all this great stuff that I could have done for Jesus? And you can't go back to earth and do anything else for Jesus because you're already in heaven, because you believe that Jesus died on the cross to pay for all your sins. But guess what? We're still on this earth. We still have breath in our lungs. We still have feet that trod the soil. We still have a chance to do all those great acts of faith and courageous things for Jesus. So God chose, no coach saves his worst player till the end of the game. He saves his best batter. The bases are loaded. Bring in Babe Ruth, right? He sends his fastest runner to run the last leg of the relay. It's like God has chosen you and everybody that's viewing to be alive at this time. He knows every dirty backroom deal. He knows all the globalist stuff. He knows all that corrupt stuff. And yet he chose for you to be here. He's given you his word. He's given you his Holy Spirit. It's like he picked for when you're going to be on earth, and you're the star player. And he's like, okay, all the saints and everyone's like, okay, we're gonna send in Sam and Sharness. We're gonna send in our best player in Chase. We're gonna send in all these great players. And they're all like anxious. And so instead of us saying, oh God, it looks really bad, rescue, it's like, no, you're the champ. You go in there. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord raises up a standard against him. Right? Though 1,000 fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, it shall not come nigh thee. Right? This is your chance. Right? Greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world.
Oh, I love it, Bill. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's such a encouraging time to be alive, and just like you said, the honor of living in these times. I don't remember who said it, but the man is cursed to live in unexcited times, right? And I'm probably butchering that quote completely, but I just love how you focus on being engaged, being obedient, living out our faith, having a hunger to serve the Lord more than to be liked, and the need for the Holy Spirit in our lives. I so resonate with all of that. So thank you so much for being with me, Bill. We so love what you're doing. Excited to see you having a platform around our country to speak the truth. And how can people follow you? Tell me more about the American Minute.
Oh, you're kind. My website is AmericanMinute.com. AmericanMinute.com. And I send out a history email, usually every day, but if not, a couple times a week. And it's something in history that can give us an insight. I tell people history is not prophetic, but it is predictive. Past behavior is the best indicator of future performance. So you put some history together with some prophetic and you get a pretty good idea where things are headed. And so AmericanMinute.com, and the books we talked about today, the one is called Silence Equals Consent, The Sin of Omission. Speak now or forever lose your freedom. Thank you.
Yeah, love the book. I'm excited to finish it. We're excited to have you back sometime early next year here at Father's House as well. And you're a national treasure. We love what you're doing, and it's so inspiring. So check out Bill's books. He has written over 25 books, I think, and we just love the wisdom and how you make history and faith come together and make it understandable, and to have a glimpse back into the truth in a world that there is so many voices that are throwing out ideas and opinions. It's important to know what is the truth and what is the history, and how can we live in light of that and look forward and be engaged as we are obedient to the Lord, as we are salt and light. And this is the whole purpose of this podcast, encouraging people to be salt and light. Thank you, Bill, for what you're doing. We so appreciate it, and wish you all the best. So have a wonderful rest of the week, Bill.
Thank you, Sam. God bless.